This episode is brought to you by Puma Running.
I'm really after a new race day shoe. Can you tell me a bit more about the Puma Fast R2?
The Puma Fast R2 are my favourite race day shoe. Now, I ran in these for Chicago Marathon, and I definitely think they helped me on my way to a 4-minute PB where I ran 2:23, just because they save your legs so much, which is obviously very helpful for marathon running.
What do you think makes them so special?
Two things I think really make the difference. Firstly, this carbon plate that you can see extends right beyond the forefoot. That just gives you an extra spring on each step, really propels you forward. Secondly, the nitro foam. This is nitrogen-infused foam, which gives you maximum cushioning and maximum energy return. So that means you are more efficient each stride and can essentially run faster for longer.
Okay, I'm sold.
Well, I have great news for our 5 Miles Easy UK listeners. We have a race special discount code for Puma Running. Enter 5ME20 at Puma Running to get 20% off.
My dream when I was 12, 13 years old was I wanted to commit the biggest robbery in the world. And I just remember just feeling just how pathetic it all was. Like this little kid that grew up, that wanted to own British Telecom, and I wanted my life to have a purpose. And I was, at this point, 26 years old, and I was rotting in a prison cell. And I was like, I don't want this life anymore. At that moment, when I broke that record, everything I'd ever wanted as a kid, to be good at something and to be successful, I attached it to money. But I realised at that moment, it's sport. Like I can get that same feeling through sport. And I said to the judge, he said, what are you going to do when you get out? And I said, I'm going to be a professional athlete. And he looked at me and laughed, and he said, your release plan is not based in reality, Mr. McAvoy. And when I went to the mountains for the first time, I just fell in love, and I felt for the first time in my whole life at home somewhere, and I felt at peace.
Welcome back to 5 Miles Easy. Today we're joined by John McAvoy, a man whose life revolved around organised crime from the age of 8, eventually leading to a life sentence at Belmarsh prison, one of Europe's highest security prisons.
It was behind bars where he turned his life in a very different direction after discovering indoor rowing. He now lives a life of freedom as a professional athlete in the Alps and is committed to changing young people's lives through trail running. We're going to find out how his story unfolded.
Rose, I doubt many, if any of our listeners are going to be able to directly relate to John's story, given he spent so many years behind bars. But what was so interesting is actually a lot of the stories he was telling us really do resonate, because it is all relative.
I think one thing that really resonated with me is the power of the mind, and just how he was able to push his body to levels that seem impossible with his level of experience and training and the lack of facilities that he had, especially in prison. And also just his perspective. He has an amazing perspective on sport, and both in the sense of being able to push himself so hard because he's had that awful experience and nothing can compare to that. Nothing can be as bad as it. But also just the joy that he finds through running and that freedom. And obviously, although I can't exactly relate to that level of trauma, I think everyone can take that same message and just remember that, we're so lucky to be able to get out there and run. And even when we are really pushing our bodies really hard and it hurts, it's for enjoyment, it's for ourselves, and it's for doing something good for ourselves. And I just, that message from John really, really resonated with me.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think perspective is such a key word, just because, as you said, it's reminding yourself how lucky you are to get to do this and the opportunities you have. And actually, when you feel that pain and when you feel like I want to stop, actually, like, stopping is always an option, but I get to do this. And I think just reminding yourself of that is absolutely key.
Interesting about the opportunities as well, because I actually cycle past Wandsworth Prison most days. And I have to say, after reading John's book before we did this podcast, I'm now going to look at Wandsworth Prison in a completely different light. Because what really struck me is, and as we actually start the podcast by saying, he's an incredible high-performing person who is doing amazing things for the community and the people around him. But that same person was in prison. if someone asked me before I read John's story and before I knew about him as a person, if someone asked me, you know, who is a criminal, I would immediately say a bad person. And actually, it's just, I think so much of it is about your surroundings, the people you surround yourself with, and your environment. And that same person who now does incredible things in that different environment did bad things and ended up in prison.
Yeah, absolutely, because he didn't realise what he was doing was wrong because it's all he knew. Whereas all we know, we've been lucky enough to be brought up and only knowing what good things are. Whereas if you're only surrounded by what's known as, I guess, in our world, bad, then you're not going to know that's bad because you don't know anything else. So yeah, I think I'll definitely see people in a different light as well from that perspective.
It really is an incredible conversation, and we can't wait to share it with our listeners. So should we get on with the show?
Let's do it. John, thank you so much for joining us for 5 Miles Easy. Rose and I are honestly so fascinated and excited to hear your story. But before we get into that, the first question we want to ask you is, what is your why when it comes to running?
Oh, what is my why? Running for me, when I started doing it, it always made me feel free. And especially when I got more run fit, is that flow state. And it just made me feel like I was just so free. And it just gives you that sense of freedom because it's so simple. Like, you don't need a bike, you don't need really any equipment other than a set of running trainers.
Well, I think we can both so relate to that. I think it's just the thing that we both always say, it just clears your mind. And you can be having the worst day, you can have the busiest mind and go on a run, and it just organises your thoughts.
No, it does. It's incredible. It's an incredible sport.
Looking at where you are today, if someone was to put a CV in front of me for you, it would just strike me as the most high-achieving, driven person who is so committed to doing good in the world. I'm fascinated to understand how that same person ended up getting a life sentence at the highest security prison in the UK. So for our listeners who aren't familiar with your story, can you just take us back and explain how you got there?
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. So I have to go all the way back before I was even born. So my mum was 8 months pregnant with me, and my dad passed away. He had a massive heart attack at 38. So when I was born into the world, like, I didn't have a parental father figure. And when I started going to like primary school, and just to go back a bit, I had an amazing childhood. Like, my mum brought me up, my sister, and my mum had 7 sisters. So like, I was really loved and looked after. But when I started going to primary school, like, it was only then I sort of realised that I didn't have a dad, because to me, getting brought up by my mum and my sister was just normal. And then kids used to tease me at school about not having a dad, and everyone would ask where your dad is, and I didn't have a dad. I didn't know where he was. So I asked my mum, and my mum explained to me from being very young that my dad had passed away before I was born. And that did something to me as a child and a young person where, and I know it sounds quite morbid, but like, I knew I wasn't going to live forever. And it sparked something off inside of me. Like, I would say it was like this ambition. When I got older, I wanted my life to have a significance. I wanted to achieve something. And then I love school and I love learning, and I developed this fascination with history. Like, it was my favourite subject. And my mum used to get me these magazines every month. They were called Discovery booklets from the newsagents. And it was like, they were like puzzles for children. And like, you'd get it, and it was about like Napoleon or World War I, World War II, Henry VIII. She used to take me to London dungeons, and she used to take me to like all these different museums when I was a little kid, because I had such a fascination in history. But when I used to put these like booklets together, like, I was reading about men and women that had lived hundreds of years before me. And I remember being a little kid looking at this stuff, thinking like they had done something with their lives, like their lives had a significance. And like I said, it gave me even more ambition, and it drove me. When I was an adult, I wanted to achieve something with my life. And then how this sort of carried on manifesting was, I had developed this absolute obsession as a child with British Telecom. And I know it sounds quite bizarre, but I remember watching these BT adverts on the telly. And then when my mum, and again, I was a little kid, when my mum used to take me to like my auntie's, our uncle's houses, they all had like BT landlines, and it was before like mobile phones. And on every street corner there was BT phone boxes. And I grew up in that era, like Margaret Thatcher, and it really had an impact on me, like the amount of money that this company owned, and they were everywhere. And I said to my uncle Tony one day, I said, how much does British Telecom make? And then he said, they make billions of pounds. And then I attached then success to money from a young age. And when anyone asked me what I was going to do when I was older, I used to wholeheartedly believe when I was older, I would own British Telecom. That was what my dream was as a child. And then the perfect storm of events happened. When I was 8, my mum's ex-husband just got released from prison. He just finished serving 16 years for armed robbery, and he was one of the most prolific armed robbers in the United Kingdom. He had 5 acquittals at the Old Bailey. He was a multi-millionaire when he was 21 years old. And my first interaction with this man was he come into our home, and it was the first time like a male had ever come into my home that wasn't like an uncle. So straight off the bat, like I was looking at him and I was just in awe of this man. Like he was charismatic, he was charming. I'd never seen a man like this before. I remember he had a big gold watch on his wrist, and he come into our home and he asked me to make him a cup of tea, and I didn't know who he was, and I made him this cup of tea, and then when he left, he patted me on the head and he gave me a £20 note, and I just remember being in awe of him. And it was the first time an adult had ever given me paper money. And then when he left, I was very inquisitive, and I'm asking my mum who he is, and my mum explained before she married my dad, when she was really young, she married him, and that was her first husband, and my sister was actually my stepsister, and that was his biological daughter. And then over the weekends, he used to come round and take my sister out, and I used to just tag along. And then what happened as the months progressed, he stopped taking my sister out and continued to take me out. And I forged this bond with this man. Like, he never had a son, I never had a dad, and we just sort of got brought together. And he opened me up to a world of organised crime. And I was so young, I didn't really understand what it was, but I just knew like the adults in that world were very, very different to the people I was growing up around, like my mum and my aunties. Like, these were men that were very like alpha male. They were very strong. They wasn't academically clever, but they were highly successful, because I deemed success to have money, and all of these men had lots of money. And sort of I grew more of an awareness of they were involved in organised crime. When my granddad died when I was 12, and my granddad had an envelope in his bedroom, and when we were clearing his flat out, there was all these newspaper clippings of my mum's ex-husband in the red top newspapers, and when he got convicted of the 16 years, because at this point I didn't know, when I first met him, he'd just been released from prison. And that was a massive moment in my life where I started connecting up all the dots. Like, I realised that's probably where, like, he had an apartment on the Champs-Élysées in France, and the cars and the houses and the money and everything all sort of started to make sense to me. And then, again, the unusual nature of my young life, to me at the time it was normal, but my real uncle, my biological uncle from my dad that passed away, he committed like the biggest robbery in the world. And he stole £26 million worth of gold bullion from Heathrow Airport. So when I was in this world and being exposed to it from a young age, I was always treated differently to young people my age because of my uncle. And then I watched a film when I was 12 years old that they made about my uncle. And I remember watching Sean Bean in this film that was made, a Hollywood film, and actors and actresses like are these characters in my actual life, like people that I'm actually sort of seeing on a daily basis. And I feel embarrassed now to say it, but like my dream when I was 12, 13 years old was I wanted to commit the biggest robbery in the world. That was what I wanted to do, because it was all that I saw around me. I had no interest in sport as a kid. And then I sort of made that conscious decision that that's what I wanted to do. And then I started truanting from school at 14 massively, because when you're in that environment around those sorts of people, like they start, again, they probably don't intentionally even realise they're doing it, but they project onto you like their thoughts and feelings of the world. So suddenly my teachers become an extension of the state. So I started to believe that like the system was corrupt, and my stepdad used to say to me all the time, the system crushes the working man and we crush the system. But he said it in a more aggressive way. And suddenly my teachers then become an extension of that. And it was like when my English teacher said to me, if you don't get an A in English or maths, you're not going to amount to nothing. And then I'm going home and I'm seeing these guys that are multimillionaires through committing organised crime. And I'm looking at that person telling me I won't get a job and amount to nothing in life. And I'm looking at these people. Like it led to me even acting out even worse towards the system.
So at that time, when you're seeing these people who have had so much success in your eyes because they've got so much money, was there anything that told you that it was wrong?
No, it was completely normalised. Like, that's why now when I go into prisons and I talk to young people like in gangs, I totally get how they see the world, because I was once like that. See, like, as mad as this is, Rose, you would all seem abnormal to me as a kid. I couldn't fathom how someone goes to work every day and pays like 40% tax to the government, of a government that you would think was corrupt. And when this is projected onto you as a kid, and it gets reinforced again and again and again, and then suddenly the people that are saying that are all incredibly wealthy, it becomes so normalized to you that everyone else feels abnormal. Now, I look back on that life now, and it is so abnormal, like the way I was living my life day to day. On retrospect, when I look back on it, like, I can't believe I used to live like that. But as a kid growing up, you don't know anything else. Like, I can remember when I was 13 years old, like I bought loads of cans of beer and I left them in my school bag, and they was in the woods, and someone found it and handed it into the police station, and my school report card was in there, and the police, the police phoned up my school, the school phoned up my mum. I went to the police station, and I remember that they tried to scare me because I was young, got caught with alcohol in the thing, and the policeman said, who was I with? And I told them, I said I was with this person. And I remember when my stepdad found out, he got more angry that I told the police about who I was with than me getting in trouble for having alcohol in the park, like with my school bag, because this whole code of conduct was sort of being projected onto me. And again, it was just normal. It was like normal not to interact with the system, normal not to interact with the police. So to me as a kid, that was my life. Like, I didn't see anything outside of that life whatsoever.
And then what about, because you mentioned at the beginning your mum brought you up and you had a great childhood. Was your mum aware of everything going on as a teenager, or did she?
Yeah, it's really, like, it was really difficult for my mum, because like my mum tried desperately to pull me back. And ironically, throughout my whole life, my mum's been the only person that's always been right. When I was a young man, the issue that my mum come up against was I was a young teenager. You got these very dominant alpha males, and they're very charismatic. My mum was working in a florist. She was earning minimum wage. Amazing woman, like the most caring, loving woman like you would ever meet. She would give you half the money in her purse if you needed it. But you had these men that sort of my life was being open to, and sort of I made every decision, but the influences around me were so strong that when I got to like 14, my mum basically lost control of me, like, and she used to get so upset. And I remember when I was 16, I went and sat my GCSEs because my mum got really upset, and I truanted so much, like it was pointless, and I didn't care anyway about what results I got. But I remember she sat me down, she cried and cried and cried. And obviously you don't want your mum to be that upset. So I went and sat my GCSEs. I didn't do any of the coursework. And when I went to pick up my exam results, Mr. Vickers, he was an amazing head of year, and he did everything he could to keep me in school, because obviously my teachers were very aware of the situation because of my surname and my uncle, and there was these films, and he was in all the national newspapers. So my teachers knew I was at a massive risk to go down that road of crime. And when I went to pick up my GCSE results, I was the last pupil to go and pick them up. And he opened up the envelope and he looked at me, and I remember this look of disappointment, and he went, if only you would have applied yourself, what you could have done. And I still managed to get relatively decent grades considering I didn't do any of the coursework. But she just lost control. And yeah, like when I look back now, the amount of stress that I put my mum through as a young person, because she really wanted the best for me and my sister. And she went to work, and as I said, like my childhood was absolutely amazing. I have not got one negative emotion or a memory of being a kid. Like, I can just remember Christmases, and my mum used to sit me down at Christmas, and me and my sister, and say, when you go back to school, don't tell any of the other kids what you've got, just in case their parents can't afford to buy them anything. And she used to break her back to give me and my sister everything she could afford to give us as kids, and my aunties and stuff like loved me dearly. So yeah, it was really hard for my mum because she lost control, and she said when she kind of knew the path I was going down, she just used to say to me, like, it's inevitable what's going to happen. And she used to say, like, you're a car crash waiting to happen.
Okay, and then so what she was saying was inevitable to happen. What was it that eventually gave you that life sentence in prison?
So I initially got arrested when I was 18, and I got 5 years in prison. That was where the journey started of my exercise, because I was locked in segregation for 365 days. So I was locked up for 24 hours a day. And when I was in that situation, I needed to feel alive. So I started doing these cell circuits, and I would read books. I didn't have any interest in sport as a kid, like I said before. But when I was in this cell, I needed to feel like I was a human, and I needed to feel I was alive. And also, I was very like I did an event a couple of years ago at Nottingham University to some criminologists, and when I gave this talk afterwards, the professor come up to me and he started talking about my relationship with exercise, and he actually hit the nail on the head. But I never processed it like this. So when I was in that cell at the beginning, I was grossly unfit, and I'd start doing burpees, press ups, step ups, and I did 10, 10, 10, and it built up, and eventually I used to do 1,000 of each exercise. And I was fueled by hatred, and it was defiant. It was like, you can put me in this cell and take everything away from me, but you cannot control my body. And it used to motivate me. And I remember when the prison officers used to come around and do the checks, like I would be in that cell just exercising or reading books, and I was like, I'm not just going to sleep sleep all day in prison. And I was fueled by this defiance. It was like, you will not break me, because I was always brought up to believe when you go into those environments, if you change, the system's broken you and you're weak. And that used to get projected onto me as a kid. And it was always about being defiant. So when I was doing that exercise, and this is when I look back on my life now, I sometimes find it difficult to process. By that behaviour pattern has led me to where I am today. But I obviously never thought for a moment when I was in that segregation cell that what I was doing there was building this foundation of a strong body that was going to later on give me the life I've got today. So I spent a year in that segregation cell. They opened up the door. They let me out onto the street. I was 1,000 times worse than the person they locked up. I remember when I was in prison, I used to have a mantra every day that I used to say to myself, these people have kidnapped me and this is not my life. And I used to say it to me every single day, and I consciously thought, I'm not going to be institutionalized. And I used to stay connected to the real world by listening to the radio, reading newspapers and exercising just to keep myself active and feeling like I was a human. And then anyway, got out, and I used to think, every year you've taken off my life, I want £1 million for compensation. Because again, you don't accept responsibility for your own decisions that you've made to lead yourself into that position. Like, it was me that put myself in prison, but in my head, I'm at war with the system and they've taken my life away from me. And I come out and I lived that typical lifestyle you'd imagine as a criminal. I knew if I lived in Britain, I was going to go back to prison. So I went to Spain. I was living 1,000,000 miles an hour. I was taking drugs, drinking, stopped exercising, and then come back to the UK just for a few days. And I ended up getting arrested again for conspiracy to commit robbery. And when I got arrested the second time, the whole game had completely changed, because the police believed I sort of had the access and resource and the connections to break me out of prison. So they had to do something. They basically made me a double category A prisoner, which meant I had to be isolated from the prison population. And they put me in Belmarsh HSU, which is a high security unit. And when I got put in there, I was with the guys that tried to blow up the tube on 21/7, and Sheikh Abu Hamza was fighting extradition to the USA. And I was locked in this unit for like 2 years. But I was put in there because they believed I was such a high escape risk, but they was in there because they were a threat to national security. But I kind of went back through this process again of exercising, training. I waited to go to court. At one point, I thought I might be able to get off it, but that didn't end up happening. And I ended up getting 2 life sentences at Woolwich Crown Court when I was 24 years old. And the reason why the judge gave me those sentences was because he believed that one of the aggravating features was my links to the criminal underworld were so extensive from such a young age, the likelihood of me being rehabilitated was very remote. And obviously, when I'm at court, there's armed police outside Woolwich Crown Court. So he's seeing all this, and he's seeing me as a 24-year-old in the dock. And whatever he gave me that day, he said, you're going to come out a young man. And so he gave me these life sentences, basically. So when I got released, I would be on licence for the rest of my life. So technically, I've signed my life over to the state. So if I ever committed an offence in the future, he said I could be recalled back to prison with them just suspecting I've committed an offence instead of actually catching me committing an offence.
What was it like the first few days after receiving that sentence and knowing that your freedom is gone? Like, how do you cope with that? When
that happened, again, it's difficult for someone that when that's your life. So in my head, when he sentenced me, straight off the bat, like, I knew that wasn't what was going to play out for me. So to me, I had no respect for the system whatsoever. I had no respect for the judge. So when he gave me those 2 life sentences, in my head, I'm thinking, the first opportunity I get to get out of here, I'm going. Hence why I was in that unit, because they knew if I had an opportunity, I remember someone from the Home Office, they used to come in every 28 days to see all the prisons on the HSU, because most of the prisons on there were very high profile. And I was trying to get onto the main prison, and she sat down with me, and they always like let you know they know more about you. So that she would sit there and she'd say, "Oh, how's this?" or "How's that person that," like, they mentioned my uncle or something. And I was like moaning, and I was trying to get back onto the house block because I wanted access to mobile phones and obviously the things that she was about to say to me. And she said, "We know the first opportunity you have to run for that wall, you'll take it, and you're not getting that opportunity." And in my head, when I got sentenced, I just thought, well, I'll probably do a few more years. I'll manipulate the system, and the first opportunity I get to get out of here when my security level drops, I'll go. And that was how I processed it. But I didn't have fear of the system. I was never scared of it. So I wasn't scared of prison. I wasn't scared of the police. I wasn't scared of the judiciary. So when I was in that situation, it wouldn't, like, it would have that effect on you, right? But me as a young man, I never had that same fear. So when I got that sentenced, it was like, well, I'm not going to serve it. Whatever you give me, I'm not going to serve whatever you think I'm going to serve. And that was the way I processed that moment when he sentenced me. And I wasn't happy, obviously. You still have to accept that I'm going to go back to that unit that night, and I've been sentenced to 2 life sentences, and you have to obviously process that. But it was that defiance in me again. It was like, well, you're not going to get that out of me.
What was your mindset each day? Because I imagine you wake up and then you're like, I'm still here. How did you get through the days? Was it exercise again? Was the thing you focused on? What was it? What were your thoughts like?
Yeah, so exercise was like a big thing. Like I got into a habit where I do a cell circuit every day for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And you have to keep yourself present. You have to. Like, you just you can't think of the future in regards. I in my head, obviously, I knew I wasn't going to stand there forever. The same mantra started repeating in my head, like, you've kidnapped me. This isn't my life. But you have to then realize you're in a situation now where you're locked up for 24 hours a day. You've got these life sentences. They never have to release me. That's the thing. Like, when you've got a life sentence in prison, you don't have a release date. You have a minimum term you serve, and you get to that minimum term. And if they don't think you've been rehabilitated, you won't get out, and they can keep you in there for the rest of your remaining life. So when I was processing all this stuff in my head, one, I thought, well, I need to get off this double category A and get sort of decategorized to category A, then category B, category C. And then once I get to that point, I'll probably have to be able to just basically walk out of prison and never come back and just abscond. But when I was in that unit, I had to keep myself very present, focus on each day. And that would just come back down to exercising and reading books, and just try to think about the now and not let my mind wander and thinking, wow, like, I'm going to be in here for the next 8-10 years of my life before I ever see freedom again. You can't think like that. If you did, you'd just break mentally. You just couldn't. So you have to keep yourself present in the moment.
So we all know how important good nutrition is to fuel our running performance. But one thing I get asked about a lot is how to fuel training sessions, because gels can be quite hard to tolerate and quite hard to get used to.
Especially as a lot of sports nutrition is heavily processed with artificial ingredients, not always that great on the stomach. But recently we've been trying Velo Forte and loving it, haven't we?
We have. Velo Forte is a natural way to fuel your performance. Their gut healthy bars, recovery shakes and performance enhancing gels and chews are all made from real natural ingredients with no junk and additives, easier on your stomach and overall better for you.
And they taste delicious too. Chef made recipes and so many incredible flavours. There's something for everyone, for every activity.
Favourite product?
My favourite product is the energy bar. Really good straight after a session or on the go.
I love this one. This is the recovery shake, and they just taste so delicious after a hard training session.
Thanks to Velo Forte for supporting this podcast. Head to veloforte.com and get 30% off by entering the code 5miles at checkout. That's the number 5 and the word miles. So then what actually changed in your mindset when you were released the next time? Because like you said, you were in prison once when you were 18. You were released, you recommitted, and you went back into your old world. So then what changed the next time after you had your long prison sentence that made you not want to recommit a crime and go back to that old life?
Yeah, like my life was organised crime from 12 years old. That was all I knew. And then you develop a reputation within that world. You get respected within that world. Didn't want to change, like I said. To me, change equaled weakness. You had been broken, and they was not going to change me. So the behaviour was so entrenched in my mind. I was like, there was nothing else. I never even thought for a moment, even when I got those 2 life sentences, oh, maybe I should do something else with my life. It was my life. Like, that's that life. And it was only when my best friend died, when I was 5 years into that sentence, my best friend Aaron, and he committed a robbery in the Netherlands, and he died getting away from the scene. And because he was with 3 people from the UK, it made news at 10. And I remember the following evening after I found out he died, watching the last moments of his life on News at 10, because it was covered as a feature, because these 4 people from the UK have gone out to the Netherlands, committed a robbery, 3 of them had died, and the driver broke his back and was paralysed from the waist down. And I remember, like, as even just, I can't even remember before that point the last time I ever cried. I genuinely couldn't. Like, when I was in prison, it was about strength, defiant. Even with the men that brought me up, like, you just wouldn't get upset. Like, people would look at you and think you was weak. And so when I cried that night, I don't know, it did something to me. I looked at my watch, like I had this Rolex Daytona, and it was a £16,000 gold watch in prison. And I did that, and it wasn't to show off. It was more defiance towards the prison officers and the establishment. Like, even though you've put me in here, this is my life. Like, this is my life. This is my identity. Like, my watch is more than what you earn in a year. And it was arrogance, but it was more not directed towards prison. It was the prisoners. It was directed towards the prison staff. And I remember just sitting in this cell, and I was upset, and I looked at this watch, and I realised how pathetic it was. And this war that I'd created in my head towards the system, and every day I was waking up, and I thought I was at this imaginary war that I created, that like I didn't accept responsibility for my actions, that I put myself in that cell. It was like the state put me in this cell, and they're not going to break me. And I just remember just feeling just how pathetic it all was. Like, this little kid that grew up, that wanted to own British Telecom, and I wanted my life to have a purpose. And I was, at this point, 26 years old, and I was rotting in a prison cell. I was literally rotting in a cage, in a box. And I was like, I don't want this life anymore. I don't want to be everyone that I looked up to as a kid. They were old men, or they were dead, or they were sitting in prison. Like, they didn't do anything with their lives, nothing productive. And I remember coming out the next morning after finding out my friend had died, and obviously having all these emotions. And I went down, and there was a communal eating area downstairs on the wing, and you would have your breakfast with each other. And I can just clearly, vividly remember sitting there, and obviously no one had found out what I knew about my friend dying. And I was overhearing these conversations with these people that were sitting next to me, and they were talking about this person was a grass. Like, when they got out, they were going to do this. And I just thought, I can't be around these people anymore. I have to get away from them. I don't want to listen to this nonsense. And I always say this, but it's like being addicted to drugs in a crack den. Like, I didn't want to be around these people, but I was trapped. Like, I couldn't get away from them. And I was just so lucky that I went down the prison gym, and there was a guy from North London, Mickey. He was a little bit tubby, and he was on this rowing machine every day. I went down the gym, and in prison, people think you get gym every day, and you don't. You can normally get 3 gym sessions a week, because they don't let wings mix with each other because of gang problems. But Mickey was on every single one of my gym sessions. Like, he was always down there. So when our gym session went down, he was there, and he was on another wing. And I asked him what he was doing, and he said, I'm running this 1,000,000 meters for charity, however long it takes. And he would row 5K, and the prison officer would sign, say he just rode 5K. And he said, if you do it, like, you can come down and get more gym. And I was like, actually, that sounds like a very appealing thing, just to get me off the wing, get me away from these people. I don't want to talk to them. And I asked the wing officer, and they agreed to it as well. And he said, look, you just need to raise some money for sponsorship. And I did it for a children's hospice in Nottingham. And I had my mum send me the money, some of my aunties, some of the prisoners sponsored me like 50 pence from their prison wages. And I gave this sponsorship form in, and basically they gave me a note, and it allowed me to come off the wing whenever I wanted to go to the gym. And the first session I ever done, I rode 32,000 meters. So I did 20 miles. And I remember so clearly now sitting on this rowing machine, and like, I used to do cell circuits, and I would train for hours, but I felt something on that machine that I had never felt before. It was like the machine become an extension of my body, and I created this like portal outside of prison, and I transcended. I had obviously like, it's like runner's high, these endorphins, and the hairs on my neck. Like, honestly, it was the most amazing feeling. And I did that session, and the next day I went down again and done it again, and the day after done it again and again and again. And then I rode the first 1,000,000 meters in a month. And obviously, like, Mickey was taking months to do it. And then I asked if I could do another 1,000,000, and they said, yeah, keep raising money. And then I did the third 1,000,000. So this is month 3. And then the prison said to me one day, you do realise, like, if you row 5,000,000, that's equivalent to rowing across the Atlantic Ocean, which I didn't know. And I asked if I could do it because I thought it's an extra 2 months of the gym that I'm going to have to come down. And then one day, like, again, I'm saying this to you now, and it feels like I'm even making it up. I knew in prison I was fit. Like, I knew, like, we used to have fitness competitions. No one in prison could get anywhere near me at these Christmas competitions. And there's a lot of egos in there, and everyone's like, I want to be the fittest prisoner. And then they would have, like, powerlifting competitions over Christmas, and you would get, like, you'd win a box of Quality Street. And power to weight, like, I used to be like the top 3 in the prison, like deadlift, squat, bench press. And then fitness, I was the fittest, but I didn't know what an athlete was because that world wasn't open to me. I didn't know someone that was a good athlete, and I had to identify that. So one day, doing this session, 10,000 meters on the indoor rowing machine, I just wanted to go as hard as I could and hurt myself. And then Darren Davis, his prison officer, who's an incredible man, walked behind me. And just as I'd finished, the screen freezes and it tells you the time of how quick you've rowed 10K. And he looked over my shoulder and he went, wow, that is super, super quick. And then he come back a couple of days later and he gave me all these pieces of paper and had all the world and British records on an indoor rowing machine. And what I had done, I had this ability in my body that I didn't even know I had. I genuinely didn't know I had it. I didn't know I had this gift. And he saw it and he gave me these pieces of paper and had all these records, and I looked at them and genuinely I did not think they were real, because I looked and I was like, I can nearly break some of them now. Like, and I genuinely couldn't compute that they were actual records. And he put this seed in my head, and I went back to my cell and I thought, I wonder if they'll let me try to break some of them, because it keep me in the gym. It'd give me more gym sessions. And I asked him, and he went to the governor called Gareth Sands, and Gareth's a very religious Christian man. He was the #1 governor of the prison, and Darren went, I think this would really change this man's life if you give him the opportunity. So there was a lot of hurdles we had to jump through, because basically Concept 2 were the officiator of the records, but because I was in prison, I couldn't do anything in a public domain, so it normally have to be witnessed in public. But obviously Darren contacted them, explained the whole situation, and they said as long as I had 2 independent verifying witnesses, prison officers, and I weighed myself, so I had to do it as a lightweight man under 75 kilo, and there was a special card that we plugged into the machine to take all the data off and send it to them, they would verify the records. So the first record I tried to break was for the marathon, and I can remember so clear again, like, I did not understand about sports nutrition at all, like no heart rate monitors, no nothing, and I broke that record by 7 minutes. And when I got to the last 4 or 5K, I started to bonk, but I didn't know what that felt like because I'd never felt like it before. And I had prisoners with sachets of granulated sugar, and they were like pumping it into my mouth for that last 4K just to get some energy. But when I broke that record, I remember being on that gym mat in that gym with Darren, and everything I'd ever wanted as a kid to be good at something, excel, I realised at that moment that I could use my body to feel like that, because that's how I felt. At that moment, when I broke that record, everything I'd ever wanted as a kid to be good at something and to be successful, I attached it to money. But I realised at that moment, it's sport. Like, I can get that same feeling through sport. And Darren went to me, he went, you've got an ability and a gift. And he went, if you waste that gift, it's the biggest travesty I've ever seen as a prison officer. And those words that he said to me that day have lived with me from that moment until now. And then within the next sort of 18 months, I went on and I broke 3 world records and 8 British records on a Concept 2 indoor rowing machine.
How did it change the rest of your prison days and your mindset towards the rest of the time that you spent inside? Massively.
So what really changed for me was exposure to sport then, because when I realised I had this ability, and then I thought I'm going to use my body as a vehicle to get me out of this place, I started reading books on athletes, and the mindset that I had as a kid, the only people I ever saw like me were criminals that were involved in organised crime. And then suddenly, I started reading these books of high achieving people, and they had the same characteristics and mindset, the will to win, the drive, the focus, because these people, people say criminals are lazy and stuff, but you have to obviously have an intellect to be able to do stuff and get away with it over a long period of time and amass a lot of money through doing it when you know people are trying to catch you doing it. So the characteristics that I had, I only saw those in criminals. And then suddenly I started reading all these books, and Darren was massive in this. Like, he started bringing me in books of athletes. And I remember reading like James Cracknell and Paula Radcliffe. I can remember reading these books in prison, and I saw another road for myself to travel down. And I saw a road where I knew I could be successful, and I could relate to what they were saying. And that's how I felt. Like, I loved the feeling of like the mind over matter. Like, when I would do something and be in such physical discomfort that my body was screaming for me to stop, but my mind was so strong that I could overcome that feeling of wanting to stop. And it was kind of like going into the fire, just rowing into the fire. And I remember a rowing coach once said to me about athletes, and he said, at a stage, everyone gets to the same level. And he said, it's the person that can hold their hand over the flame the longest that will win. And that's what you've got to train your body and mind to do. It's like and that was later on when I got out. But when I was in there doing those records, like, and I was reading all these books, and I started having more of an awareness of sport. Yeah, like it changed me massively. Like, what I wanted to do with my life, obviously. Like, my dream in prison was to become an athlete. I started reading books about visualization, and when I was on that rowing machine, I used to visualize when I was training around like myself being free and being an athlete when I got out. Even to the point when I had my first parole hearing, and the judge, because I had to sit in front of a judge and a lay person and a criminal psychologist, and they sort of had to assess whether I was safe to be released. And I said to the judge, he said, what are you going to do when you get out? And I said, I'm going to be a professional athlete. And he looked at me and laughed, and he said, your release plan is not based in reality, Mr. McAvoy. And obviously I had all these records, so I kind of thought it was a given I was going to get out, but that didn't happen. But what he did, he said, we're going to transfer you to an open prison, and I want you to do like your level 3 gym instructor qualification, so you've got a plan B. But I was all in. Like, I say it to you now, like, I was like, I knew I would make it happen. I knew. I'd visualized it when I was in prison, and I thought, I don't need a plan B. Like, I was so committed to, I know I can make this happen. And actually, at the back end of my sentence, it got quite frustrating because I'd done everything I could do physically within the constraints of prison. And then I knew I had this gift and ability, and I was like, I'm trapped here. I couldn't get out to use it. And then there was so many things I wanted to do, and I couldn't because I was still in prison. And then we can kind of like link this now into running a little bit, because I know this is a running podcast. But kind of when I got moved to an open prison, I'd done everything I could do on an indoor rowing machine. Like, I was the only lightweight man to have all 3 ultra endurance world records at the same time. And I kind of exhausted everything I could do. Like, all I could try to do was break my own records. So when I got moved to this open prison, I thought one day, wouldn't it be amazing to like run an ultra marathon? So there was a prison officer called Mark Sheriff, and Mark Sheriff at this open prison used to be in the Marines. And when I turned up to prison, like, within prison, everyone had heard about this guy that set all these records. So he loved me. The minute I turned up, like, he gave me a gym orderly job. He was a really lovely guy, massive, like, keen cyclist and a runner. And I said, Mark, do you reckon they'd give me a special license to do like an ultra marathon, like to go out for a weekend? And he said, yeah, probably, if we sign it off. And they let me do an ultra marathon, which was from London to Brighton. So furthest, this is not an exaggeration, the furthest I'd ever run was 10 kilometers on a treadmill in the prison gym, in the open prison. And they let me go home back to Bromley on a Friday. And then I was able to do the race that started in Blackheath and finished on Brighton Beach. And it was 110 kilometres because I got lost. And I finished this race, and I literally paralysed myself. Like, my legs swelled up because I obviously wasn't used to running. But that was my first ever running event I ever did. And then I went back to prison on the Monday. I had to get the train from London back up north because I was in a prison near Derby. And I had to get a taxi from the prison. I couldn't get the bus or anything. I couldn't walk. I literally couldn't walk. And then I was like limping down like the prison drive to go back to this open prison.
It shows how powerful your mind is, though, to put yourself through that much pain. I mean, as Rose said, 100 kilometres further than you'd ever run before. I think like not many people would be able to do that, to put themselves through that pain. And your mental strength clearly got you through that. So that I was going to ask then, how, when you were eventually released from prison, how was it getting back into the real world? Did training and sport help you adjust back to real life? Because you've been away from it for so long.
Yeah. So I when I was in prison, when I was in the open prison, I was doing my level 3 gym instructor, and it was the first time I ever had a job outside. So I got a job at Fitness First as a gym instructor, but I wasn't allowed to tell anyone in prison that in the gym that I was from a serving prisoner that was doing voluntary work at the gym. So I was in this tiny little village called Burton-on-Trent, like up north, just outside Derby. And when I served my lunch breaks, I was able to like have some free time for an hour from the gym. So I used to go to the local library, and I got a library card, and I'd go on the internet. And my dream was that I went to be a professional athlete, and I knew physiologically, like obviously I was good on a rowing machine. So the natural migration was I want to become a rower. So I went on Googled all this stuff. London Rowing Club in Putney was at that point was a high performance centre for lightweight rowing. So once I just saw those words, high performance, lightweight rowing, was obviously my body type and stuff. I sent an email to the head coach there, Phil, and Phil was an Australian, and he coached the women's quad at the World Championships, and then he got the job at London Rowing Club. And I just like said, I'm currently living up north. I'm coming down to London. Didn't tell him I was in prison or anything. I'd love to join your rowing club. And he emailed me back and said, we don't take novices, which they didn't at the time. He said, we don't really take them, but what's your 2K and 5K? So my 2K was 6:18 and my 5K was 16:31. Anyway, he's obviously seen these numbers and he's emailed back. He said, come down and we'll give you a go. I see like how we get on. So eventually I ended up getting released. And I got released on a Friday afternoon, and on a Saturday morning, I joined London Rowing Club. I walked out, got the train from where I was living in Bromley at my mum's, and I got the train across to Putney, and then I went into this club. I was like a fish out of water. Like, this is the day before I'm in prison, and then suddenly I'm at this rowing club. It's very prestigious, and no one knew anything about me. Phil didn't know anything about me, and he obviously, again, rowers have a tendency sometimes to big themselves up. So I couldn't tell them I set any records on a rowing machine, because I knew the first thing a rower would do is Google me. And what would come up was the Sun newspaper, all these headlines in the Times and Daily Mail. I literally got on a rowing machine. He sat next to me with a chair, and I just did 2K. And I could see he was a bit surprised, because I was quite small. I'm not tall, but I was 72 kilos. But obviously I'm compact, 5'8". And he used to always have this mantra and say, you can't coach what God's given you. And he was a big physiologist. So he would think if you had the engine, he could coach you to use that engine on the water. So he said, we'll let you join the squad. And then he put me in the senior squad, ran with everyone. So the next Tuesday night, LRC, they used to do the squad sessions. So everyone would come together, and it'd be like 3-6Ks on an indoor rowing machine. You'll all be in banks. And I can remember rowing next to Sophie Hoskins, that won a gold medal at London 2012, and Rob Williams, that won a silver medal in the men's lightweight 4. And I'd been watching them on my open prison TV, watching these two in the Olympics, and then suddenly I'm rowing next to them. So I went through this journey over the next like 5-6 months, and I didn't tell anyone anything about me. But obviously, there were a couple of people, like there was a rower there called James Lindsay Flynn, and he went to the World Champs, and he come down one night to help out. And he was watching me on the rowing machine, and he come up to me at the end, and he was like, how long have you been rowing for? And I said, just a couple of years and stuff. And he was like, no way. He went like, no way. You're not putting them sort of numbers. He knew. But again, I didn't want to open up. But eventually, what ended up happening, people found out. People started Googling me, and then I realised that happened. And I made these incredible friendships there. And it really changed my life. Like, when I joined that rowing club, I thought I was going into a high performance centre. It was about me being a successful athlete. Like, at that time, it was like, I want to go to the Olympics. And that was what I wanted to do with my sporting career. And then I developed these friendships with these people, and it was a community. Like, and they were amazing to me. Honestly, like, they helped me so much. And then when I wrote this blog and people found out about my past, I honestly, even to today, it was so touching, the support I received within the rowing community. Like, because they only knew me as John. They didn't know my past. So I developed these relationships and friendships with people. And when they found out about me, it broke down all these like preconceptions they would have had about someone like me. And it made them challenge their beliefs, right? Like, I was rowing with people that, they were Olympic athletes, but there was also people at the rowing club that were police officers, that were judges, that were lawyers. And they were like, they couldn't believe that I was that person. But then when they did find out, it was the support grew even more for me. And like, I made some incredible friends at that club, and that whole community, was so supportive of me, and they wanted me to succeed. The thing for me, what was really difficult was because I was so driven, like, I realised quite soon that, like, I had to do a sport where it was on me. I couldn't do a team sport because I took up rowing so late in my life. Like, I was physiologically strong, but technically I was so like off the mark of where you would need to get to that level of sport I wanted to reach. So that was kind of how then I sort of migrated across into Ironman triathlon.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just incredible how, you know, you've obviously got a lot of physiological talent, but as Steph said, your mind must have been so strong to, first of all, go after those world records in the prison, but then to get out and the next day immerse yourself in this completely alien world and put yourself out there and compete with the best. Where does that come from? How much of it is just inherent and you've always had it? How much of it was built through those years in prison? Because I can imagine, you know, you must have had dark times that you had to get through, and being able to pull yourself through it with no support around you.
Yeah, I think I remember listening to Tony Robbins once, and he was doing a talk, and he said you can't blame people for all the bad if you don't blame them for the good as well and the learnings. And like my stepdad, and I know it sounds bizarre to people that aren't in that world, did love me and he cared about me. He's very protective of me as a young person. He thought he was doing the best for me, right? Like in that world, he thought he was protecting me, and it was a natural progression that's what I would end up doing. And he taught me a lot as a young person. And I don't know, like some of the stuff around like resilience and the defiance and not breaking, like that's been part of my character from being a very young kid. And then when I was in prison, you realise, or what I realised when I was in prison, that like it is all on you. Like it was my journey. Like no one was going to hold my hand. It didn't matter if I cried or got upset. Like in my head, this is me now. Like this is it. I'm naked. Like I have to make myself get through this, and that built up such strength in my mind. And also, you really discover how powerful the human mind is. Like when I was in that place, at certain points, like I can remember, like when I was in that unit, and again, the prison authorities are never going to say this, but they want you to feel hopeless because they don't want you to try to think about breaking out of prison. So when I was in that unit, like they want you to feel very sort of suffocated, and you're in that environment, and then and again, in my mind, it was like, you aren't going to break me. Like I'm here and I'm still trying to process where I am, and I want to get out of this situation. So I was always like looking for angles. How can I function? How can I get out of this? And maybe, again, these things that I learned, that when I come out, it gave me the confidence to join a rowing club. Because again, and it's something that, again, I always think about with sport, with pressure. Like, nothing is worse than being locked up in segregation on your own for 365 days. I think I must have spoke in that year about 10 hours in total to people. And a lot of that was from defiance. I mean, I wouldn't interact with prison officers. I'd be very disruptive and stuff, and I didn't want to interact with them. But that is bad. So by me doing an Ironman or whatever it is I'm doing, like sitting on a rowing machine and trying to break a record and I'm in severe pain, my perspective of what bad is shifted massively. Like that's bad. That's bad. And it's really, it has aided me in my life. And even with things like public speaking, I remember when I first started doing it years ago, I talk to people and people say, have you ever had training? I said, no. But when I stand up on stage, I think, well, I've been in far worse situations than this before. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? Like, that's how I always process everything. But yeah, it's definitely, I look at prison as, for me, I see it as a positive. It was the best thing that happened to me. The only thing I regret is the fact that my behaviour had a negative impact on other people's lives. But if you said to me now, I could go back and not spend that 10 years in prison, I wouldn't not do it. I would go for that journey again because I learned so much about myself and how strong and powerful that the human mind is. It really is an incredible tool. And it goes back to the ultra marathon, right? It's like you realise how strong the mind is and you can make your body do things if you push it. And your mind will give up far sooner than the body ever will. And I learned that through being in prison for all those years. And I got to interact with people that I'd never, ever, ever get to interact with in life. And it opened up my awareness of putting myself in other people's shoes and positions in life, which has aided me later on in my life with the work I do today.
Yeah. I think the key word you said through all that is perspective. And actually everyone can relate to the word perspective, even though they may not have experienced the extremes that you have, where you can compare it to the lows of being in prison. Actually, having perspective really does aid your performance, because you can always compare it to, it's better than this scenario. So I think that's such an important one for people to take away. And then, so you've mentioned you went into Ironman, and you also then you moved to the Alps. So how did that all happen? What happened next?
So I got released from prison. I started competing in Ironman, and then I progressively got better at doing that. And then one thing led to another, and sort of my profile got bigger outside of like rowing, and other opportunities come to me, and I started doing a lot of work within within sort of politics. I was doing a lot of sort of projects. We opened up schools during the 6 weeks holiday for kids from disadvantaged areas to go to the schools, and they acted as community hubs, sports hubs. So we give the kids 2 healthy, nutritious meals a day, and lots of activities and stuff, and positive role models within very sort of deprived areas in the UK. But that opened up a lot of doors within the government, and this is sort of going on to this question. In 2018, because I was doing all this work, I was still like, I got released from prison. Like, I was serving a life sentence in the community, but because it got absurd, like, I can remember I used to go and see my probation officer once a quarter. So every 3 months I'd have to sit with her. And then like one day she said, like, what have you done the last 3 months? And in that 3 months, I can remember, because at the end of the conversation, she just looked at me and said, this is ridiculous. So I spoke at the Conservative Party conference on like reforming the criminal justice system. I had meetings at 10 Downing Street with Theresa May's policy advising team. I was doing all this other work, like going to Parliament, and she just said, this is ridiculous. Like, you should not be coming to see me every 3 months. And I think because of all that stuff I was doing, I don't know how, but it fell on the ears of someone that was Home Secretary at the time, Savage Javid, and she phoned me up one day and said, I saw the missed call. So she phoned me, I saw a missed call, and normally when your probation officer rings you, it's never normally good. And I thought, I wonder what's wrong or something. And I rang her up, and she said, look, I've got something to tell you. I honestly don't know what this means. She said, so I'm going to tell you, but then we need to figure out what it actually means for you. So I said, what? She said, the Home Secretary is removing all your life sentence conditions. So I said, okay, well, what does that mean? And she's like, I don't know. So she said, look, you're going to have to come in and sign some paperwork in the next month, and we have some more information. So I went at the end of that month, and I went into the office, and there was all these probation officers that have been there for years, and genuinely, like, some of them had never seen this before, but the Secretary of State removed those conditions. So I had conditions where I wasn't allowed to travel abroad without permission. I had to ask permission where I lived, what job I did, all this stuff. Anyway, it all got taken away from me, and then that allowed me the opportunity to then go and do stuff abroad more freely. And at this time I was doing triathlon, and COVID struck, and I was meant to do this race in the Alps, and I went anyway because there was a little window in the June of that summer where I was able to go out there, but there was no race. It got cancelled, but I had accommodation, and none of my friends wanted to come, so I went on my own, and I was in the mountains for a month on my own. And it made me again like look at my own life and what I was doing. And I've never felt at home anywhere I've ever been in my life. Like, my life was so, I always say this, it was very turbulent for a long period. Even before I went to prison, I was always moving house. I was paranoid. I was living in different countries, moving everywhere all the time, and always looking over my shoulder. Then I go to prison. Then when I get released from prison, my life again, I haven't really got control of it. And when I went to the mountains for the first time, I just fell in love. And I felt for the first time in my whole life at home somewhere, and I felt at peace. And I, again, the way I see life, and it's just like, my life's not going to last forever, and whatever it is I do, I'm all in. And I think I want my life to feel content, and I felt content there. And I thought, I'm going to move here. And then that was it. And then I moved to a place that I saw on the Tour de France when I was in prison in 2012, which is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. I absolutely love the mountains and being outdoors because it makes me feel so free.
I think that's almost so ironic that now you live in a place which is just the epitome of freedom, outdoor, amazing air, just you can run everywhere. And the thing that's got you there is that pivotal moment in prison where you turn to sport, almost to beat the system, to get out of yourself for that extra bit of time, to get into the gym and rebel against it. It's now all ended up with you being in the freest position possible.
It's amazing.
It's
even sometimes, even sometimes, like, because obviously, like, when you go into a situation where your life gets paused, it really does make you reflective on lots of stuff, because, like, you realise how precious life is. So I always say, like, going to prison for an extended period of time is probably the nearest a human can go to dying, but actually staying alive, because you literally get buried in a coffin. And society, friends, family, everyone moves on with their lives, and you're out of society, like you're removed from it, and you're in this place, but you're still alive. And then you come back into life, and then you realise life doesn't revolve around you. And once you're gone, life will just continue without you in it. And that was a big moment for me to realise when I was in prison. One of the big learnings that I took from it. And that was why when I got out, I always promised myself that I would want to be at peace, and I would want to live the life I want to live, and be happy and content in my existence, because life is so short and it's so precious, and you have to maximise your short time on earth, and whatever it is that makes you happy, do it. And if things don't make you happy, don't do it. Like, if it's toxic relationships with people, cut them out. Like, life's too precious. And I think sometimes we're all guilty of it to a point, and I get like it sometimes, but what I always do is I have awareness and I catch myself and I go, I'm not engaging in this stuff. My life's too short. I want to focus on the good and not the bad and negative.
I think we can also all get so caught up in our own definition of success and what society kind of channels us into. Obviously, your early years defined success as money. What is it now?
It's evolved massively, Rose. Like when I first got out, I say it, I would say I was very Lance Armstrongish with my drive for sport. It was like this ruthless wanting to be the best, go after it, like smash everything in your way, bulldoze through it, and just be the best, be a winner, number one. And my life changed because, again, it's all learnings, right? You experience different things by interacting with different people. Was a pivotal moment was going into schools and meeting people, kids. And again, like, I didn't realise the impact that my life story could have on other people. And also the impact Darren, the prison officer, had on my life. It made me start realising that, like, life is about giving other people opportunity and opening doors. Because when I was in prison, like, I had a gift and ability, but without him helping me, and not just helping me do the records, but supporting me, mentoring me, I wouldn't be how I am today. And then when I started going to schools and meeting kids and going back into young offenders institutions and meeting kids that were in prison, I realised that actually legacy, like records, medals, all this stuff, you hang them on a wall, they don't mean anything really. It's legacy is about the contribution you make to other people's lives and how you better enrich other people's lives. And then once I started understanding this, it made me feel more fulfilled. And I often say this to athletes, like, not just being completely consumed with what you do and realising you're more than just that. And I can remember clearly a few years ago, an Olympic gold medalist come with me to London Zoo to this event that they were holding for Christmas for kids that had terminal illnesses. And I remember him coming and he had his gold medal in his like little felt bag. And he felt quite embarrassed to get it out. And I said, mate, trust me, you get the medal out, those kids will be like flies around you, like little bees to honey. And he did it. And then I remember the kids were loving it. They didn't know what it was. They were holding his gold medal and everyone's taking pictures. And then when he left, I can remember me and him chatting about it. And he said, like, that medal for that moment come alive. And it made him feel better than it did winning the medal. Because he realised that this little thing that he had in his hands, like how much it meant to these kids. And it really, that process I went on with contribution to other people's lives and legacy, and like how by me impacting on other people's lives, how it can improve their quality of life, and then their kids' lives will be better because I've impacted their lives. And then when I'm dead, and their lives are better because they've sort of interacted with me at some point in their existence.
And I think that leads nicely on to you then setting up Alpine Run Project. So could you just tell us a bit about that? You were just talking about inspiring the next generation. What is Alpine Run Project and why did you set it up?
So the Alpine Run Project all come about. So when I moved to the Alps, one, I realised when I was there quite quickly, it's probably one of the least diverse places you will ever go. It's very locked to a very specific demographic of society because of the cost that it takes to get there, and obviously doing everything out there, the activities, accommodation, that stuff. And I thought it was grossly unfair that like kids from like inner cities don't get those opportunities to experience the mountains. So me and a friend of mine put some money in a pot, and we took out a group of 6 young people from London back in 2022. It was just when COVID was coming to an end. And I saw firsthand when we paid for that trip, and those kids come out to mine, they stayed in a chalet next to where I lived, and we took them hiking, the impact that trip had on their lives was massive. Like, genuinely, I could see the change in them from the beginning of the week to the end. And again, the way my brain processes, it was like, well, how can I do something here and create something? And then I was so lucky the following year, I was training as a cyclist. So I did all my bike racing and I had quite a good season. And then a friend of a friend knew someone that worked at the UTMB, and they said, my friend John wants to do one of these UTMB races. And I always knew this thing existed. I heard it and I knew like these crazy people run all this distance. And she gave me an email address. She said, email the lady and just say who you are. And I think she'll be able to get you a spot doing one of the shorter races. So I emailed. She said, you're not a problem, John. We'll send you a code. So I go and enter. So I had 6 weeks to start running because I was cycling fit, but I didn't do any running. So 6 weeks later, at the start line of this race in Chamonix, I was doing the 42k one. And I remember as I was running through the ending of it, coming into Chamonix, Mont Blanc was on my left-hand side. And again, it was like the hairs on my neck stood up and I felt really emotional. And I remember like I felt like I was welling up as I was running down into Chamonix. It was amazing. Like I had this like runner's high. I felt amazing. It was like I was floating along. I probably wasn't, but I felt like that. And then I finished that race and it was like the next day I was like, I know what I can do. I can use trail running as the vehicle to get these kids from inner cities, train them up and bring them to places like this. So I went and pitched this idea to Nike, to the head of marketing. So the Alpine Run Project was set up last year. We picked 12 young people from across the UK. 50% of our participants will always be female because that's super important to me. Very diverse group of young people, which I would say is truly representative of Britain today. Some of the kids were more sort of advanced runners than others, but it was a melting pot, the mixture. They was all supporting each other, and we took them on this life-changing journey to use the power of sport and trail running as a vehicle to help them better their lives. So the ultimate goal is by 2027, we want to get 100,000 young people running and into trail running, into nature. We've developed some incredible partnerships with different race organisers across the UK. This year, on Saturday, we've got 100 kids coming to Birmingham. And this is going to be the Alpine Run Project core group for this year coming. So I'm super excited about that. And then these kids, one of the conditions for them being on the project is we want to see them go back into their communities and help get more kids from their environments active and running and create their own run groups. So we want to see like from that core group, they get this year 3,500 kids running. And obviously it's a multiplying effect as the years progress.
Such an incredible initiative. And I think it's really cool that it's trail running because that's not something that's traditionally offered in schools.
No.
But unless you're, there must be so many kids who could, as you've seen, love it and are really good at it that just will never get that opportunity because of the system.
Yeah.
It's a really cool initiative.
Most definitely. And like at the beginning of the project, like most of the young people, like we had one young girl, for instance, when she come down to London for the kickoff event, I remember seeing her for the first time because before that, when we announced it was all on Zoom. So when I first met her in person, her eyes were like saucepan lids. And she's met me in London and we were at this kickoff event. I'm thinking, it's because she's in this Nike building and she's seeing all these pictures and posters of athletes. And then she said to me, it's the first time I've ever been to London. I said, okay. And then it turned out it was the first time she'd ever been on a train and she was 18 years old. And obviously, even if that was the end of the project, like getting a train to London, that was life-changing for her. But then to watch this girl grow on this project, and then when we took her out to Chamonix, it was amazing because most of the kids didn't know Chamonix was a place. They didn't know about Mont Blanc, and you only know what you know. And it was like me going back to when I was committing crime as a kid. That's all I knew. But once your life and you see how textured life is and how colourful and the opportunities are out there, it expands your mind. And I can hand on heart say last year, every single one of those kids that went for that project, and it's not that they're all going to become professional runners because that's not what it was about. Every single one, it profoundly changed their lives. And I said with that project, like I've been part of things before as a little bit more of an outsider and I've watched stuff and it's all for a photograph or a video and it looks nice, but it doesn't actually really help the people that are involved in those projects. And I said with this project, fundamentally, the success of it is how many people's lives we change for the better. And I'm so sort of fortunate that this year we're going to grow it even bigger and we're just going to continue to keep making it bigger and bigger and bigger. And then in a minute, we'll speak to a young girl that, she's massively impacted my life in a positive way. And hopefully I have hers.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And as you just said, we are very lucky that we have one of the young people that did the Alpine Run Project last year. So, Eleanor, we're going to speak to you for a short while and hear about your experience.
just tell us a bit, what drew you to join the Alpine Run Project in the first place?
So I'd always like ran like quite a bit, but just on the road and stuff, like, and I was never part of a club or anything like that, so it's just a bit of a hobby. And then I saw it, John's video on Instagram, and I went to my mum. I was like, could I apply for this? And like she was like, yeah. And like I had no idea really what I was applying to, because I always knew that like the UTMB existed, but I thought that it would be something like in a few years that I could do. So yeah, I applied for the project, and then we had like an interview call, and then I did that, and then I went downstairs and Mum, I was like, I really, really want to do this. And then yeah, we found out we got on it, and I was shocked. So my mum said, she was like, you know, when you told me about it, I always knew you'd get on it.
Oh, that's so lovely. And so you didn't do trail running before, but now you must absolutely love trail running. What is it about trail running that you love, and how did you get to love it?
I just think that, like, I like road running, I like speed work, you know, pushing yourself, but like the hills are just like another level. Like hiking up the hills is like, it's so hard, but it's so like enjoyable at the same time. And I just love like the adventure kind of aspect of it, like going out on a Sunday morning for like a long run, like especially in trail running, it doesn't matter how far you run, it's just like you're hiking or you're like flying down a hill, or yeah, it's just like a lot more engaging, and I like how adventurous it is.
There's so many different dynamics to it, aren't there? And
Yeah.
so much to just occupy your mind, I think, when you're trail running,
Yeah.
as opposed to on the roads where it's just hit the pace and
Yeah,
run at a
because like
certain
when
speed.
you're going like down a hill, like you really have to concentrate, otherwise you're just gonna literally fly into a puddle or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. And what's been your proudest running moment so far?
I think I'd have to say winning the YCC, because like we kind of thought really none of us from the project are going to win it, because like we're just there to enjoy it for the experience, and like we don't live in the mountains, we don't train on that terrain or like at the altitude or whatever, and a lot of the people there have literally been doing it since they were like born. So yeah, when I won it, we were like, what on earth? Like, we did not expect that. And then like I remember I literally like cried of happiness, and like I don't cry of happiness.
That's so amazing. And then presumably winning an event like that must have opened some doors for you. So what's next? What opportunities have you had as a result of winning that race?
So I actually applied for the Youth Skyrunning World Championships for Team UK, and I got on that. So that's this summer. Which definitely would not, I think the main reason I got on was probably because I won the race in the Alps, and then just a lot more stuff this year with John and like the project and all Nike and everything like that.
It's just amazing that it came from that one Instagram post.
Yeah, like honestly, because I met the woman who I saw on her story, and I was like, if you hadn't reposted that, like my life would be completely different. Like it's just crazy.
Yeah, and what would you say to other young people who perhaps aren't into trail running yet, but are considering giving it a go?
Like, just get out there and don't fear the judgment of it, because I think a lot of girls in my year and stuff like that, they don't want to go for a run because they don't want people to see them, and like they're just embarrassed and whatever. But like it literally doesn't matter, because like nobody cares, and then people will see you potentially go and win stuff like me, and like they're inspired, and like you originally thought that they would just judge you. And I also think that in school, like in PE, it's kind of, you're made to hate running, and it's just seen as a bad thing. And I think that like people just need to get past that barrier and realize that it is enjoyable. Like it's not just a punishment.
Yeah, I think I found that with a lot of my school friends. I mean, we're all 30 now, but at school, a lot of them hated PE. I always ran during school and no one would understand it.
Yeah.
Whereas now those same girls love running. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah. I even think now, because like I'm in sixth form, like about to leave year 13, and like more of my friends are starting to like do couch to 5K and stuff like that, and are like asking me about running. And like I feel like they're kind of starting to realize that like it isn't just a horrible thing.
I always find it really sad when I hear it so much in schools that young people don't like, they're embarrassed about running because you look sweaty and you look like you're working hard. And it's just, as you found, it gives you so much joy and gives you so
Yeah.
much. It doesn't matter how you look. I mean, no one looks great at the end of the run, but it's given you so much.
Yeah, and I think like it improves so much else of your life as well, because I go for a run quite a lot before sixth form, and if I don't, I sit there bored all day, like I can't do my work, I can't concentrate. And like some people, like from the surface, it might kind of seem like, oh, she's not revising enough, she's just running all the time. But like I won't sit there and just scroll through my phone all day. I'll go out and do a nice run and then come back and be so much more productive.
Yeah, it makes you feel alive. And I also think, as you said, if it affects the rest of your life, I think a big thing is confidence.
Yeah.
I think running makes you a more confident person. Just being able to achieve those things, it transcends into every other part of your life as well.
So, Eleanor, we've had your proudest running moment, but John, just back to you to close an amazing chat with a question that we ask a lot of our listeners. What's your high five me moment? So the moment that if you could go back to one moment in time and give yourself a massive high five, what would it be?
Watching all of these young people finish in Chamonix last year. It was the most amazing moment of my life. Genuinely, like, I don't know if you've seen the documentary, but Darren started crying, and I'm not an overly emotional person, but even I was like, it was hard for me to express like how protective I was of them all when I was there. I've never felt like that before. And then how proud I was when they all finished, especially when the last girl finished. Like, we literally had one that won it, and then one girl that finished dead last, but her finishing the way she did, and us all as a family at the end, like different races, different religions, all there, and sport brought us all together, and we were just all one big team. And it was, that was the proudest moment of my life by a country mile.
Yeah, oh my God, I can imagine. I mean, what an achievement to make that happen.
Yeah, it was amazing. It really, really was.
And after everything that you've gone through, your journey throughout your life, I mean, just to bring it to where you are today is just absolutely incredible. And I can't wait to see what else the project achieves.
Thank you. I appreciate your support. Thanks.
Thank you so much for coming on, and Eleanor as well. Can't wait to see what you achieve.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing both your stories. Just, I'm sure all of our listeners will be just so fascinated, inspired, and we can't wait to follow along.
Oh, thank you, Rose.
Thanks for joining us for 5 Miles Easy.
See you next time.